Welcome everyone to our podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Paul. I'm a recovered addict. I live in Scotland. I'm really pleased to say we've been joined by Patricia today. Would you like to say hello to our listeners?
Oh, hi listeners. My name's Patricia. I'm a recovered drug addict and I live in Bournemouth.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm really pleased you're here.
Welcome.
So, we're going to be talking today about step 8, which is made a list of all persons we'd harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. It's a great step, and it's a statement of intent to bring some reparation and mending to our relationships with employers and family members, neighbours, partners, children, parents, brothers, sisters. So I can't wait to get into talking about that with you, Patricia. But first, I wondered if we could talk for a couple of minutes of each about recovery in general terms, what recovery looks like, the programme, the fellowship. So come on in, the floor's yours, Patricia.
Okay, so my experiences of recovery is I'll share a little bit about where I came from. So where I came from was a pretty dysfunctional upbringing, but never went without. I just was like a bit of a defiant child, went out into the world thinking I knew what was best for me and found myself participating in and involved in stuff that was like out of my understanding, and picked up a substance, and that started a kind of a list of catastrophic events. And when I got here, I thought that drink and drugs were my problem, but I came to understand that I was the problem, and how I interacted with life was my difficulty, and I'd use drink and drugs as a solution to cope. And through the process of coming into Cocaine Anonymous and going through the 12-step program, I've learned to manage life without a substance. And life is very peaceful, very different, and well, I'm a miracle in action, really.
Absolutely, and that's the joy and the wonder of recovery, isn't it? You know, we come to these rooms wanting to get clear, of a life-destroying addiction, but if we work these steps thoroughly and prayerfully with someone that's in the solution, armed with the facts, and we've got a video on this channel about sponsorship. That's a very important element in recovery. Everything's going for us. We get connected with a wealth of information, and we get a support group. And if our sponsors and support group don't have the answers, chances are they know people that do. Is that right, Patricia? So
yeah, very much. I mean, my sponsor to me, she's like my overseer. She's like my little angel looking at my life from above, because she sees what I don't see.
Yes, quite. Yes. And I think that's very interesting because, ultimately it is about getting a connection with God. People come in the room and say, oh, God, just keep calm. Most right-thinking people acknowledge there's a creator. The big book's clearly talking about the creator, and we're not connected with any religion, any denomination. So if you're new to Cocaine Anonymous and this is your first point of contact, this podcast, welcome. We suggest you come along to meetings. I'll be putting up a meetings list at the end of the video. There's lots of meetings on Zoom now, probably several hundred anyway, every single week at least, if not 1,000 of them. You're welcome at them all. If you come to a Zoom meeting, never feel that you have to put your camera on. In my experience, only around a quarter of attendees put their camera on. So don't be put off coming to a Zoom meeting, nor do you even have to speak. If you just want to listen, that's perfectly fine. So you neither have to speak or put your camera on to come to a Zoom meeting. So my suggestion would be come along to a Zoom meeting and hear people that have recovered from active addiction share, their understanding, their process, their program of action, how they stay free from active addiction. And the solution is very much in these steps, and so recovery looks like connection instead of disconnection. For many of us in active addiction, it's great fun in the early years. Our friends are there, the music's playing, everything's good. We've got our health, sanity, you know, and our families. But unfortunately, for many of us, our solution for life becomes a massive problem, and we start to lose our money, our relationships, our employability, our sanity, and in many cases, our freedom. And we end up wondering what the hell's going on with the doors locked, the curtains closed, and we're just locked in a cycle of active addiction, living to use and using to live. So if you're new to recovery and you're listening to this, and that description in any way fits you, do come along to meetings. You can get clean and you can stay clean through Cocaine Anonymous. So without further ado, let's come into the steps. Now, as usual on the screen, I've got the wonderful readings on step 8 out of the book, which is our second book, really, a book called The 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions. I've got it up on screen. And remember, if you're watching this on YouTube or elsewhere, you can rewind and read this. Just because I'm scrolling through, I happen to go through too quickly or too slowly for you. You can, there's various things to do. You can read it in your own time. But this is from a book called The 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions, which you can read completely free or listen to in audio form completely free at aa.org 24/7. So I'm going to have this on the screen as usual for folks to read. So I just want to hand it back to you, Patricia, for a couple of minutes to talk about, step 8 and your understanding of step 8 and how it was for you. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So yeah, so step 8 for me was a real, I call it a changing step, and the reason I call it a changing step is, so when I came here, I came here full of shame, guilt and remorse, and had nowhere to go with it. And then through the process of going through the steps in order as they're written, in step 4, I had the opportunity to just make sense of my nonsense, where I was blaming everybody and everything for what had happened to me. After my step 4, I kind of understood that I had a part to play in stuff, and from that I'd caused a lot of harm, and I suppose once I started to not drink and use, I started to feel very badly about my family not wanting to have anything to do with me, and questioning why they didn't want anything to do with me, and what could I do to right the wrong, and I'd see family members and I couldn't look at them in the eye, because I felt so ashamed of the person I'd become. And then my step 8 was like, I'll call it, so the directive I was given from my sponsor was, we look at step 8, and rather than just do a list of harms, we do a list of the persons we'd harmed, but from that we write a letter to ourselves from that person that we'd harmed, and we kind of consider how they would have felt towards us, and try and have a little bit of understanding of the pain and devastation that I'd caused, my family, my friends, my loved ones, and through the process of writing the letters, I suppose I learned. So my biggest learning was I learned to manage. I learned to manage different kinds of feelings, because I didn't have no understanding of feelings, because I was so blocked off, from my drug addiction and my drinking. I didn't know what it was like to feel hurt. I didn't know what it was like to feel anger or rage or disappointment or despair, and the process of writing the letters and considering the impact on other people, the process of that taught me to kind of connect with different kinds of feelings and understand about learning about forgiveness, because the biggest thing in my step 8 was I learned to forgive myself. I think that was one of the biggest things for me. I learned to forgive myself. Yeah, it's a very interesting step. It's very broad, roomy. It's a lifelong process. you know, and yeah, it's one not to miss, I'd say.
Absolutely, and you know, and obviously, you know, I'm not a spokesman for CA or anything. I'm just someone in recovery. This is all my opinion, whatever I share. You know, I mean, it's in the process of the steps. It's very important, if you're listening to this and new to Cocaine Anonymous, that we work these steps with a sponsor. Now, a sponsor is someone that's armed with the facts about addiction and recovery, has managed to get free and stay free from active addiction for usually, you know, a reasonably substantial amount of time, and has an understanding of the program of Cocaine Anonymous, the fellowship of Cocaine Anonymous, and the steps of Cocaine Anonymous. So therefore, any questions that people have can be answered. And as I said earlier, or they'll have access to people that will have the answers. That's the power of the fellowship. You know, and we learn to work the fellowship as well as work the program. And the idea is it's the first of the steps that has an intent to reach out to others. In step one, we look at the realities of active addiction, the consequences, emotionally, financially, spiritually, on ourselves and others, employers, partners, family members, neighbours, society. And we get real about active addiction, don't we, Patricia? We have a thorough, it's the first stock taking of the steps. Is step one, and we take a real good look at ourselves in active addiction, and it's been said that it's the only step you've got to work properly, because a proper understanding in God's grace and power of step one, why on earth would I ever want to use drugs again? You know what I mean? If I truly acknowledge honestly the realities of active addiction, why would I? It's insane. So we're clear on the insane behaviour and consequence of active addiction through step one. In step two, we have faith and trust that this program, this process, these steps can work for us, that we too can get clean and stay clean. In step three, we make a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understand God. You know, we're willing to give the program a go. So the first three steps could be summed up: honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. In step four, we make a list of all our resentments, all our fears, and all our harms. And it's often been said resentful, fearful people are often harmful people, because hurt people, and misery likes company. So when we're less resentful and less fearful, we're more productive and more in the solution. And in step five, we then, through step four and the last boxes of the three sheets of step four, the resentment sheet, the fear sheet, the harm sheet, we're then clear on the exact nature of our wrongs. We admit them to God, to ourselves, and the human being. We then come to step six. We're then pretty clear on our defects of character, and we make a list of our assets of character, our character assets. Then we come to step seven, which is the first step of the second half of the steps. And all that stuff, Patricia, would you agree, in step one, in step four, all that stuff, our defects in six become shortcomings. By that time, we're attending meetings, we're in the solution, we're reaching out, we're perhaps doing a bit of service, we're trying to live on a personal, spiritual basis. And so by the time we come to step seven, all that stuff is viewed as shortcomings. That's all it is. We've come short of God's glory or man's glory. We've come short of our expectations of ourselves. We've come short of others' expectations of us. It's shortcomings, all of it. We've just come short, and then we come to step eight, which is the first step that declares willingness to reach out to others. That's the crucial thing about step eight for me, Patricia. I'll let you back in a second. I can talk all day. but hey, the reality is I'm not an expert. Life is tough. If you're listening to this and you think it's all just swimming and everything's great, life's tough. Financial concerns, health concerns, societal concerns, you know, fear, anxiety, past, the present, future. Life's not easy, but these 12 steps, would you agree, Patricia, give us a way up and out?
Yeah, definitely a way of living. You know, I was just reading on page 82 of the 12 and 12. It says, we might next ask ourselves what we mean when we say that we have harmed other people. What kinds of harm do people do one another anyways? You know, it's like, so it talks about instincts in collision, you know, how is it that I interact with others, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually? You know, if I'm in a bad mood, am I taking it on other people? If I'm in a good mood, am I expecting other people to be in a good mood, like I am? You know, I might say I'm not a thief, you know, because I've never stolen anything monetary or material, but I've had to ask myself, did I steal people's peace of mind? You know, and it's interesting. You know, for me, this step is where my biggest change happened. You know, and how I say that is because it's a daily thing. You know, I consider how I'm interacting, and I consider my expectations. I consider, am I asking too much of myself? And within that, asking too much of other people, you know, because the reality of this is, you know, about the harm. It's like, you know, if we keep it really, really simple, you know, you get to the end of the day and ask myself, have I been sober today? And if I had, then I've done a good job, you know, then I've done a good job. Have I harmed myself? Not today, because I'm sober. I've done a good job, you know, and then that me keeping sober for even one day, I've done a good job, and it gives me the opportunity to look at how else can I be of service, you know. Am I kind? Am I loving? Am I considerate? You know, it's.
Absolutely. Yes. Sorry.
No, you carry on.
Sorry, I'm terrible for interrupting.
Exciting you.
Just so many good things, Patricia. That is just so beautiful, and that is the journey. I mean, from worrying where the next bag's coming from, or the next amount of cash to get the next bag, and who will get it from? Will there be enough? Will it be good? Will it last? You know, and living to use to live, to being concerned about our behaviour, and how we affect others, and if we've been in the solution, what a transformation. You know, I mean, that's what's available in these rooms: complete freedom from active addiction and a happier, more whole future. And I've seen it time and time and time again in men and women, and I've seen it time and time again where it's maintained long term. You know, it really is. It really is that good. You know, it really is. Now, you know, so we come to step 8. I often get asked, Patricia, what do you actually do? What do you do in these steps? What do you actually, you know, what's it look like? Well, for me, when I work with persons going through this process myself, you know, as well as using the big book, I use the 12 and 12, which is what we're looking at on the screen here. And so the person will have read what's on the screen here before we start. Well, they'll have completed step 7 to start off, which means I'll be content they've done a thorough step 7, which is that they ask God to remove all their shortcomings. Oh, just a second. We've got a bit of a situation there, right? So they'll have completed step 7, and at the end of step 7, I will say, "Do you feel you completed through step 7?" But I only ask that when I'm sure they have for myself, and if they respond in the affirmative, right, okay, so do I. Wonderful. So next time we talk, I'd like to have read step 8 out of 12 and 12. I'd like you to still be in the process of attending meetings, particularly if they're in early recovery, a meeting a day. I'd like them to have their own spiritual journey, their own spiritual literature that they're reading through each day, even if it's just quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, as well as reading the big book, and contacting at least 2 persons in recovery every day, preferably in the morning. So they're on that spiritual journey, Patricia. You know, if anyone's listening to this, it's not the case that, oh, we're just doing some reading and writing and everything's going great. No, you need various ingredients for a successful, victorious sponge. And if you always use the right ingredients, you will always get the same cake. Now, recovery looks slightly different for everyone. The program of action looks slightly different for everyone, but also for many of us, it looks very similar. And that's the amazing thing in the fellowship. For me, the fellowship is not the program. Fellowship of Becoming Anonymous is not the program of Becoming Anonymous. The program is the steps, the 12 steps of recovery, and the program is the first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which we often call the big book. And, you know, so when we are doing what others have done, we get what they got, which is long-term sobriety. So I said all that to say this. So what does it actually look like working step 8? So the completed step 7, they'll have read what's on the screen now. I will have supplied them with a sheet of paper, an A4 sideways sheet of paper that says, who have I harmed? So the first set of columns on the left is who have I harmed? Jack, my brother, my wife, my uncle, my employer. What did I do? Or I pinched that stuff from my employer. How can I make amends? Now, there's different ways to make amends. You can ring someone up. I don't like amends by text message at all. In fact, I don't like text messaging at all. For me, that is a complete no-no when it comes to amends. At the very least, it's a phone call, a letter. You mentioned letters, Patricia, and I'll let you back in a second. But the best way is face-to-face. And it's not a case of we're not there as 12-step crusaders. We're not there to convince them of our spiritual journey and how wonderful we are. We are there to specifically make amends. So, for example, on the left, I've got in that column, I've got my brother, what I did. I slept with his girlfriend. How it would have made him feel, it would have affected his self-esteem, his pride. It made our relationship controversial. And just for the record, I didn't sleep with my brother's stuff. But I mean, I'm just giving an example of what an amends sheet looks like. And then on the right, amends, how to make amends. Face to face is the best way. So that would involve actually talking to him about it and asking him, how can I put it right? What can I do to make it right, if anything? And so what you end up with is you list all the amends that you owe, and how you think it made the other person feel, and then your proposed solution. How can you make it right? Is that a fair description in any way to how you work step 8, Tricia?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. So I have experience of different ways of doing it. So I think I've experienced doing it the way you've spoken about. So my most recent experience is, like I mentioned earlier, step 8 letters. So what we do is so we read a section from the big book, page 64 to 76, step 8 and 9, and then we're given a slightly time to go off and do the letters. So in my resentment inventory, that's where I did my harms. So I looked at the harms I'd caused others, and I put that in, like you described, how would it affected them, what defects of mine were in play, and it also looks of what could I do or have done instead. So I look at that in the resentment inventory of the harm, because like I said to you about the shame, the guilt, the remorse, I've hurt a lot of people and I live with that. And when I sober up, that becomes really evident because of how I feel about myself, because when I'm not present through active addiction, I don't care about anybody, even myself, So I learn about the harm I've caused in my step 4 resentment inventory. And then my step 8, it's like I take the harm and what I believe that to be in the shape of, whether it's manipulation, threatening, terrorizing, violence, disappointment, sleepless nights, just worry, causing nervous breakdowns, family falling apart, or lots of different things. And like I said to you about the letters, so I'll give you an example. So my mum writing me a letter, dear Tricia, it started off, dear Tricia, the devastation you caused me. And then from that, she was able to tell me how I'd really made her feel, and I heard things like nervous breakdown, sleepless nights, disappointed, worried to answer the phone, daren't answer the door, had to wash my hands of you, Tricia, because I just couldn't deal with what was going on. And as a mother doing that, I just felt desperate, So within that, I actually walked in my mum's shoes for a mile, you know, and my mum's not an addict, she's not an alcoholic, she doesn't know the lifestyle I've led, you know, and so I kind of looked at things from her point of view as a mother looking at a child in active addiction, and considered how she may have felt, you know. And then what that did for me was it prepared me for my amends process, because when I, you know, went in to make the amends with my mum, I wasn't going to tell my mum the harm I'd caused her, because my mum might not even be aware of the harm I've caused her. So what I did was I said, I believed I've caused you harm, Mum, and I'm this is the opportunity. Is there anything you want to tell me about the harm I've caused you? You know, and within that, my mum was like, oh, it's fine, and then I said nothing. I sat quiet and I listened, and after about 30 seconds my mum shook, and then I actually saw her connect with her own feelings, her own pain, her own expression, and then she was able to tell me the truth, you know. And had I not written my letter, I wouldn't have managed that. I know that I would not have been able to sit and see my mum in that pain, you know. So the letters for me were a real godsend, because they allowed me to acknowledge, manage, ready for when I heard the truth about myself, you know. And within that process, it would give me the learning that I don't ever want to put my mum through that again, you know.
That's amazing, accountant. So it's very therapeutic.
Very, yeah, very.
You know, and it's reaching out with a view to reparation relationships.
Yeah.
You know, and as you said, you know, in the example you gave, you know, very often the harms are deep, you know, and will last in quite a while. And very often it's how we made people feel, isn't it? You know, we didn't particularly care as long as we got our stash.
No.
And, you know, the consequences, and it's often been said just on that topic that, you know, the greatest immunity against active addiction is working with other recovering addicts, alcoholics, staying in the solution, talking about recovery, praying about recovery, reading about recovery, learning about these steps, learning about the solution, staying in the solution, suiting up and showing up and getting after it on a daily basis. You know, and then through this process, we then reach out to those around us that we've harmed, you know, and that's a very powerful example. And, you know, I have seen marriages restored. You know, I have seen parents get access to their children. I have seen children, you know, get back in touch with their parents, or indeed move back in with their parents if they've been homeless using drugs. You know, I've seen people become employable, you know, examinations, qualifications, etc., and you know, things like that many times over. You know, and it's a really important step 8. I mean, obviously, we'll be discussing step 9 on the next podcast, the actual doing of the amends. But you know, so in effect, once, you know, someone I'm working with has completed the sheet, which usually 2 or 3 sheets, the amends sheets, they will have basically on the left it'll say who they owe amends to, what they did, what happened, or how they harmed them, how they think it made them feel, how it affected the other person, and then what amends, and also what ought they to have done, what is the solution for that kind of behavior. And that's why the last box on the sheets that I use, Patricia, is a large box, because it's not just how I make amends, it's what ought I to have done, what would God's will have been in that situation, and how can I amend my behavior going forwards so that I don't repeat that kind of harmful actions or words.
Yeah.
So what you end up with is, again, similar to step 4, you end up with all them last boxes, which obviously involves practical amends, how you're going to I mean, sometimes the persons have died. You know, on the list you might have harmed your granddad or something, or, you know, your great aunt, and they've passed on. So there's different ways to approach that. You can write a letter and read it with someone you trust, or you can pray over the letter and read it out loud in God's presence, or you can go to the graveside and read the letter, or out into the countryside, or you can share the letter with a trusted family member or someone close to you. So there's different ways to handle that type of events.
Yeah.
You've lost contact with somebody. It might be a situation that you got into trouble years ago, and we don't make amends that would harm anyone else. And this is quite a complex area, because I've seen people make amends that I'm making this amends, but they've upset the other person that much that it was just wrong. That's not what it's about. If it's really, really it's complex, particularly when it's family members. But if you've really harmed someone, or it's really going to upset someone, then we're not to make the amends. But that's very much the exception, not the rule, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying there. It's like, I when I did my amends, it's like I don't go in without consideration. I don't. We're not able to go in without consideration. It's like, if it's an ex-partner, does he have a girlfriend? If I went to make amends to an ex-partner who's got a girlfriend, would that be causing harm? It's just about consideration. And that's the thing. This whole program is about consideration, and thoughtfulness, and moving forward, and growing, and effectiveness and understanding. And my summing up of it is, I can know a lot, but that doesn't make it happen. What happens is when I do a lot, and it's an action program about giving, not taking, and I pride myself, because my family's got very well. I've got my mum, my sister's over from America that didn't want anything to do with me. My mum has been to stay in my house, and she was absolutely terrified of me. They're proud of me. They're surprised at me.
Yes.
Because my sister said, I'm in awe of you. And I'm like, why? And she said, because you bring wonder to the world, with your spirit of forgiveness.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're a miracle, aren't you? We're miracles.
Yeah.
And that's that's beautiful. Now we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. And I'm often asked, that, and that is the fruit of the program. You know what I mean? Power of example is exactly what you just described. And the reparation, the healing of family relationships is priceless. And I've seen that time and time again. In fact, there's one person I'm working with at the moment, and they're terribly upset. And we are an anonymous program, and sponsorship and sponsor work is completely private as far as I'm concerned. I never divulge detailed names, but just speaking in very general terms, the person that I know quite well has really upset their parents, and they're in the process of healing right now. And I think the prime thing about amends is we become living amends.
Yeah.
That is to say, we try to live in the solution. We try to live in the sunlight of the Spirit. We try to be loving, harmless, gracious, kind, and true, which is what you spoke of earlier with your what we call nightly inventory, which is a really important part of recovery, which we'll be discussing fairly in depth when we do our podcast on step 10, which will probably be a matter of days from this one being released, that we're doing now on step 8. We'll talk at length about nightly inventory, and it is basically that, did I harm anyone today? Was I successful today in my program of action? Did I upset anybody? Was I prayerful today? Was I thoughtful? Did I practice my program today? And many other questions. Did I do the will of God today? What could I have done better today? Did I help someone today? These kinds of questions is a nightly inventory. But, just to come back to my earlier point, to be a living amends, to be in the solution, and to be what we ought to have been, is what we call a living amends. And that's the ultimate thing that as God's children, God himself establishes us as productive members of society through going through this process, Patricia, I would say.
Yeah, very much, very much. Yeah, it's a beautiful experience, and I urge anyone to just give it a whirl, go to a meeting, like you said earlier, get to a meeting, ask somebody to help you, get a big book, go through the 12 steps, have your own experience. And even if you're not a believer, we just have to be willing to believe in something bigger than ourselves, and you might surprise yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I know I've worked with people that don't believe in a creator, and they too can get clean and have a better future. Over the years, I've worked with Sikhs, Jehovah's Witnesses, atheists, people that just believe in an intelligent, creative force. We are not a religion. We do not dictate what anyone ought to believe. This
No.
is alcoholism, addiction, and recovery, and getting clear. And for most of us, we have faith and trust in the Creator, but that is not necessary to recovery. As I say, I know people with decades of continuous sobriety who don't believe in a creator. We're not a theological seminary. Everyone is welcome at our meetings, and everyone gets to share if they'd like to share, and without question or challenge to what's said. The only requirement for membership in Cocaine Anonymous, or Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous, is a desire to stop using. That's the only requirement for membership. There's no other. There's not, you've got to work the steps, how I say, or you've got to read this book, or you've got to adhere to this part of the book, or you've got to do this. No. God gave Bill Wilson great wisdom when these steps and traditions were formulated. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. So if you're listening to this and you've a desire to stop using drugs, and if you've listened this far into this podcast, it's not by chance. You have a desire to get clean, and you can get clean and stay clean through the program of action in Cocaine Anonymous, outlined in the first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which we often call the Big Book, which you can read completely free. And lastly, I'm just going to put up on the screen there, at aa.org, you can listen to or read the Big Book or the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions at any time of day and night, completely free. You can also download a free 12 and 12 app or a free Big Book app at the Google Play Store. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the podcast. Patricia, is there anything you'd like to say before we bring things to a halt?
Yeah, I just like when you were saying about you can download these and read them. This morning, I go on this link and I listen to the audio, and I find that where I can be cooking, cleaning the bathroom, just walking down the street and listening to these books on audio, and it's just an interesting way to receive, a bit of hope. Yeah. So,
absolutely. Yeah. And most of us, as part of our day, we will spend time in our personal spiritual literature, and we will spend time in our recovery literature, and we'll listen carefully and thoughtfully and prayerfully at a meeting. And many of us will share in a meeting. We will also do service, and we develop the spiritual toolkit, our ways of coping, and life's manageable. We're manageable today, Patricia.
Yeah.
We can get through this, and we do that as a society and a fellowship. That's the important thing. It's a we program, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, so look, that brings us to the end of the podcast. I just want to say, come along to a meeting. The meeting screen has been up. Just rewind the video, and you're very welcome. Meetings. There are more meetings than what's on that screen, by the way. That's just a couple of dozen of the meetings, and many of them are on every day. So come along to a meeting. If you've any questions, put them in the comments down below. We'll do our best to answer them. If I don't have the answers, I'll find someone that does and get an answer to you promptly. So that's it for now. Please like and subscribe. And thank you so much for coming along. On the next podcast, we're going to be doing step 9. So I'm really pleased you could come along today, Patricia.
Thank you.
That's okay. And I'm sure, you'll perhaps want to come back and do another podcast with us for our listeners of general topics on recovery once we've completed these 12 steps.
Yeah, lovely. I'd look forward to that.
Spot on. Okay, family, thanks for listening in today. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.